Go.
Good afternoon, this is Mr. Marshall. I just want to take some time to show you the gear and accoutrements and uniforms and such that the Civil War soldier used in obviously the American Civil War. Some of this is similar to the stuff we talked about in the Revolution. Some of it, however, is very much not. Now, even though I'm in a collared shirt and a long sleeve collared shirt for that matter, I am actually undressed for the time period. A man would not go outside without all his buttons buttoned, sleeves down, things of that nature, but I'm sitting in camp, so it would be acceptable at this point. Just to show you, this is everything the soldier would have on his person, and probably a little bit more. There are a couple of extras that some soldiers would not have had. Start easy. The first thing you'll notice is there's no tent, and that's very typical during this time period. Very few soldiers carried any canvas to sleep under. Occasionally companies would have flies, which are basically just large canopies, but they would be used only to cover equipment, weapons, things of that nature. So regardless of the temperature, regardless of the weather, you're outside under the sky with nothing but what you see here. And what you have is a painted canvas ground cloth. This would be on the bottom, keep the moisture from coming up and getting you wet as you sleep. You would have one woolen blanket, and this is the optional piece of equipment. This is a rain poncho, and you'd put this over the top of you to keep the dew off, and also obviously to wear if it was raining. These are actually usually for that purpose more trouble than they're worth, but as a cover when you're sleeping, does a good job of keeping the dew off and retaining body heat if it's a cool night. And as you know, this past week, early May, at least here in East Tennessee, we actually had snow in the Smokies, and it was freezing here where I live in East Tennessee. So any time of year you can have all kinds of weather. So that's your basic camping gear. It's not exactly what you'd see in a modern camp by any stretch of the imagination. Moving on to your personal gear, and I'll actually pack all this stuff up. This is my jacket. I'll be putting this on in a second. So again, not only do you have to wear the collared shirt, you have to have either a vest or a jacket to go over the top. Now the rest of this is what in the Civil War days was called a knapsack. We would call it a backpack. This is a Confederate style backpack, very simple. It's painted canvas to keep moisture out. And in this would go anything you didn't absolutely have to have quickly. So if I'm lucky, I have a spare shirt. So I will fold this up very tightly. Down in there. Pair of gloves. Now you see they're different. One is, this would be for my left hand, this would be for my right. The reason it's fingerless is so that you can more easily load your weapon. So because you need dexterity in your right hand to do that. So gloves to keep my hands warm, extra pair of socks, sleeping hat to keep my head warm. Now in addition to that, I'm going to put my poncho in that bag. As well. All right. Other things that would go in here, you'd carry about 50 rounds of ammunition and some spare rations. So those would go here in the top because of all the stuff in here, that would be what you'd want to be able to get to the quickest. And then it simply has a button closure. And then this flap comes over. And again, those flaps keep the water from draining down into that bag. Now, anything I might need quickly, I don't put in my knapsack. Or anything I definitely want to hang on to. The reason for that is when you go into combat, your backpack or knapsack gets tossed in a pile. If you win the battle, you might be able to get back and get it. If you lose the battle, whatever's in there, you just lost. So you don't keep anything of vital importance to you or survival in that. That goes in this. This is your haversack. Think of this as a man purse. Now in this would be 2 days rations, which I don't have. A ration would consist of about a ½ pound of salt pork, hardtack, maybe some eggs if you've been able to scrounge some and boil them, anything along those lines, but that would go in here. Now what I have is a mess kit. Now if you look at this mess kit, you can see it used to be a canteen. The Civil War soldier was very, very innovative in using and reusing equipment. So this canteen sprung a leak, couldn't be repaired. So you take the side off. Now you find a good stick, your frying pan, and this is your plate. So it's a nice self-contained mess kit. You can put your handle in there, your fork, any of your rations can go in here. And then you put the top on, the lid on, come across, and tie it off, and now you have a good solid compact kit. Your wallet, any money you'd have, maybe a letter from home, pocket knife. These little cloth bags are what your rations come in. They're called ration bags. You might put some things you wanted to hang on to here. Every soldier's best friend, a deck of cards. One thing about Civil War playing cards, notice no numbers on the card. That's because, let's be honest, most of these guys couldn't read. So they can probably count 10 because that's as many fingers as they got. And then the pictures tell them Jack, King, and whatnot. The other thing I have here is a sewing kit, also called a housewife, needles, thread, because if your uniform came apart, you notice all my spare uniforms already in my knapsack. I didn't have spare pants. I didn't have a spare coat, so if it gets torn, you got to sew it up yourself. Usually you'd have a few guys in a unit, maybe they were a tailor or a tailor's apprentice, and they would help soldiers maintain their gear, because especially on the Confederate side, the government wasn't giving you anything. Other things going in here, just a little notebook to write down maybe letters home, things of that nature if I can read, and some spare shoelaces. These have all kinds of uses beyond just shoelaces. The last little piece of gear is this. This is just a little copper shield, and what this is for is while I'm here in camp, I can take my bayonet, shove it in the ground. That sits in the bayonet, and it turns it into a candle holder where you don't have to worry about the candle dropping through the hole in the bayonet and setting your camp on fire, which I've seen happen at a reenactment before. So very important and handy little piece of hardware. And then notice again, 3 buttons on the haversack, 3 different buttons because they've come off over time, and you just replace it with whatever you got. Again, reuse and reuse. So that closes up. On the outside of your haversack is the Civil War multi-tool, also known as a tin cup. Obviously you drink from it, you also cook in it, you make stew, soup, whatever. This is also your shovel. So if you've got to dig a latrine or help dig defenses, more than likely you break up ground with your bayonet and then scoop it out with your cup. Needless to say, hygiene, not that high on their list. And in this, I've simply taken a piece of rope, loop it around one of the buttons, button that last button, and there you go. So now we'll just say that the first sergeant of my company has called first call, get ready to move out. So I've got to get all my other gear, canteen, which would be filled, of course. So that means I've got to get ready to go. So I take my knapsack and set it here. Move my leathers. And I do this because I want to keep my wool blanket as dry as I can, so I will just simply fold it up inside my ground cloth. That way, even if the ground cloth's a little damp from being there all night, it isn't really going to hurt anything. I'm going to take this. All right, now everything I own is packed and ready to go. So now I've got to get ready to move. Now the uniform I'm wearing today is one that we had made, my unit, for the 150th First Bull Run reenactment. It portrays the 1st South Carolina Rifles. That's why the color of the jacket is green, because green was the branch color for riflemen. You notice on the hat the seal of the state of South Carolina. And this is called, well, it performs the duty of a jacket. It's called a battle shirt. It's simply a cotton overshirt, if you will. Very common in the South. And the nice thing about it is it's much, much cooler in the summer than a wool jacket, which is what most troops would have had. So it just simply comes over the top like so. You button it up. Just simple silver buttons, possibly donated by some ladies in South Carolina. And I'm now ready. So, to gear up, the first thing you put on is the last thing you would ever take off, which is your cartridge pouch. This is where your ready ammunition goes. So it comes on first. Now this is a British style cartridge pouch. Okay. This is my cap pouch. I'll show you that here in a second. And then over that comes your belt. Your belt in the Civil War was not there to keep your pants up. It was there to carry stuff, in this case, my bayonet. Over my left shoulder goes first my haversack. And then my canteen. Obviously you want your canteen really easy to get at, so you can take a drink as you're on the march. lastly, you would put on your haversack or your knapsack. Assuming you can find the strap. And it has a little closure here in the front that helps the load bearing. And now I get my rifle and I'm ready to move out. Now all this gear, once you load in full ammunition load, full rations, you're looking at 60 or 70 pounds of equipment. The musket alone is 10. So 50 pounds would be on your person. And I'm ready to go into combat this way. This is typically what you would do. The only thing you might drop, again, the knapsacks. Most soldiers didn't because there was no knowing if you were going to get back to it or not. So many would fight in full gear. Now, I mentioned my leathers, my accoutrements. This is an English pattern set. It would have come with the rifle. So I have the English style cartridge box, English style straight bayonet, cap pouch on the sling as opposed to on the waist belt. Even have it's called a tompion to keep water out of the barrel, and a leather shoulder sling on my Enfield rifled musket. So this is ready to go. As far as my headgear, I want to set this down for just a quick second. This is the standard infantry hat at the beginning of the Civil War. It's called a Hardy hat. General Hardy was a West Point graduate. He designed it, wound up fighting for the South. He also designed the drill manuals for all the Civil War units, or most of the Civil War units used. So it's nice, it's got a wide brim, covers the ears. However, the regular Army, the regular U.S. Army, took this hat and made it significantly less useful by turning up one of the brims just for style. Putting the infantry horn on the front to let everybody know you're infantry. You got a nice brass eagle thing on the side. Now all this had to be shined. If you had brass, so like the brass device on my hat, I would have to shine that every morning. If I didn't, I'd get in trouble with my sergeant. So most soldiers, after a few months of getting yelled at for not shining, got rid of all that stuff, collapsed the top of the hat, and made what's called a slouch hat. Again, still got the full brim to keep the sun off of you, much lower profile, and nothing to shine, so very handy. Other units wore what were called kepis. These are French-style hats. You can see they don't do much for keeping the sun off your eyes or anything like that. It's just purely stylistic. Now, one thing about colors, if you notice the red on this kepi, red is the branch color for artillery. So an artilleryman would wear this kepi. This is yellow, obviously. So the yellow is this branch insignia for cavalry. So if I had a hat cord on my Hardy hat, it would be green since I'm a rifleman. Whereas on this U.S. regular Hardy hat, you see the light blue, which is the color of infantry. Another style hat is called the slouch hat. Or not slouch hat, I'm sorry. The forage cap. Similar to a kepi, but if you notice, it can be much taller. Now, sometimes you'd get these in leather and stiffen it up so it actually looked like this. Civil War, they were wool, so they appeared like this. Now, what you use this forage hat for, and why it's called a forage hat, if you go out and you find some eggs, you turn the chin strap over, and you now have a nice little bucket to carry the eggs or salt pork or whatever you stole from the farmhouse you just found, and carry it back to your unit. So that's why I got the nickname, the forage hat. Okay, so we'll now get to the weaponry. The thing that made the Civil War so bloody was the fact that the tactics they used were virtually identical to the tactics of the Revolutionary War. Straight lines, shoulder to shoulder, approach at a walk, standing straight up, no cover, get about 75, 100 yards from the other guy, and start blazing away. Now that works fine when you have a smoothbore musket, because their accurate range is only about 75 yards. However, most Civil War soldiers were armed with rifled muskets. This was the first effective military rifle. Rifles up to this point were notoriously slow to load, so most militaries didn't use them. They believed volume of fire was more important than accuracy. So now you have a weapon. If you could see the sights, they're graduated out to 900 yards. A good shot can hit a man-sized target at about 250, 300 yards, similar to a modern-day hunting rifle. At 100 yards, even a bad shot shouldn't miss. The only reason casualties were not even higher than they were was just soldiers getting excited and just not taking their time aiming. Or the volume of smoke generated by the black powder in these just made it hard to see the other side. But they're incredibly accurate weapons and very, very effective. Now, to load a Civil War musket, you go through a process called load in 9 times. Okay? This is how the soldier would be instructed. So you would be standing at attention, and if you do it, quote unquote, by the numbers, this is where that phrase comes from, they would say load in 9 times, load 1. At 1, you simply bring the weapon to your left-hand side and put it out at an angle so you can see the muzzle and your ramrod. Now, every Civil War soldier had to do it on the left. If you were left-handed, you had to learn to use your right hand because that's just the way it was. Because everybody in the line had to do it. If you had 2 guys trying to do it on the same side, they'd get in each other's way. 2, you open up your cartridge box and you handle the cartridge. Civil War ammunition came in paper cartridges. This is a blank. It would be folded like so. And then on the end, the musket ball would actually be physically tied to this assembly. 3, you tear a cartridge. Civil War soldiers had to have at least 2 teeth, and they had to oppose. They could miss all their others because you tear this with your teeth. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. You charge the cartridge. That means you pour it down the barrel, and you'd push it to where the bullet was right at the top of the barrel. 5, draw rammer. 6, ram cartridge. 7, return rammer. 8 is prime. Notice you tee your feet like so. You bring the weapon to half cock, go into your cartridge box, and get your percussion cap. Okay? This is what actually ignites the charge. It goes on the nipple of the musket, and then 9, you come to the shoulder. Once the whole company is back at shoulder, that tells the captain, who's now behind his line of soldiers, that everybody is loaded. And then I'm going to shift this way, and if I'm in the front rank, there's some footwork if you're in the rear rank, because you're in 2 rows, if you will, and you can fire back and front row at the same time. There's just some footwork involved with the rear rank. But the command would be ready, to your feet, bring the weapon to full cock, and then aim and fire. And then you would hold it here until the commanding officer gave the command to recover arms or load. So now I'll do it without going in 9 times, just to show how fast you can do it. aim, fire. A good soldier could load and fire 3 times in a minute. If you knew you were going to be standing at a spot, say you were in a defensive trench, what you could do is take your ramrod and just kind of stick it in the ground in front of you instead of trying to return it back in the slot every time. Another thing that would happen when you're in a defensive position is if you had soldiers who were really fast loaders but not very good aimers or shooters, they would stand behind the guys that were good shots would take a shot, hand their weapon back, and they'd load it for them and hand up another one, and that way they could keep up a good volume of fire. That's the last thing. The last weapon I have is the bayonet. So if we're getting ready to attack the enemy, I'd be standing at attention, and they'd say fix bayonets. Again, you bring it over here, take your bayonet, and come back. And now I've turned a perfectly good rifle into a halfway decent spear. The good thing with these are called socket bayonets. You can still load and fire with the bayonet affixed. It does slow you down a little bit, but then you would come in and you would stab the other enemy on the attack. That's pretty much it. That's what the Civil War soldier fought with, what they lived with, how they existed. I hope this kind of helped put the daily life of a Civil War soldier in some perspective for you, and you'll have some questions to answer and do that, and I will see y'all when I see you. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.